Hey YouTube, welcome back to my channel. So I wanted to make a video addressing and answering someone who wrote me an email about some video topic suggestions, and I think they will be helpful for other people. They probably have the same questions or comments. So the first one was about emphasizing success stories and talking about cases that have healed on a no-name basis. I I definitely want to do this. I just need to figure out how, because I don't want there to be identifying information necessarily, because I've asked some people, hey, do you want to come on my channel and talk about your recovery? And they're still in that process of, no, it was too traumatizing. I don't want to talk about this anymore. And we have conversations about other things in life and we don't talk about the withdrawal experience. I really would like to do more interview style videos. It just has never worked out. So I guess the timing isn't quite right. And as far as talking about people who have recovered, let me just think and talking about it on a no name basis, let me just think about this a little bit more and see how I can do this without, because I've seen situations too where someone has talked about someone else's success story and then that person has gotten upset because they felt like there was still identifying information. So that was the first one. The second one was how to manage activities and exercise to avoid triggering waves and or post-exertional malaise, and navigating the desire to get back to normal life with the realities of healing with and having a compromised nervous system. So this is a bit of a complicated question slash response. And the way that I see it, and I did a video on post exertional malaise, and I talked recently about this topic of pacing, because pacing basically means that you're not, I think it's unhealthy to get into the mindset of, I'm going to avoid everything stimulating until I'm healed. And sort of having that waiting approach. And also, there's the problem that people have of, okay, I'm feeling better, I'm in a window, I'm going to do everything I've been unable to do. And that usually doesn't go well, because then the person will have a pretty heavy crash and then they're in bed for 3 weeks or whatever their symptoms might be. They're a lot less able to function after that crash. And so this is where pacing can be really good, because it kind of teaches you to do both, or it's sort of a middle ground. So I had a conversation very recently with someone about, if you think about sort of organic anxiety and how you approach that, it's very similar in the sense that you sort of, your natural instinct is, well, I'm not going to do this until I'm recovered. I'm not going to do this until I don't feel any, I'm not going to do this until I feel no anxiety anymore. Or, and sort of have that mentality like everything has to be put on hold until I feel better, because that time might never come. And you also don't want to just jump into the activities that make you anxious if you have something very specific that triggers you, without having doing some gradual exposure and having some of the knowledge to navigate the feelings that might come up. So it's this fine balance, this sort of dance between, okay, I have coping skills, I have a toolkit, and I have to start pushing the envelope, and I have to start exposing myself to that which might cause symptoms or cause me the anxiety that I'm trying to avoid because it scares me so much. It's the same type of thing. It's a pacing approach, it's a gradual exposure approach, because like I said, waiting until you feel better to do anything that you perceive as stimulating usually doesn't go well, and you can be waiting forever. And also, part of that recovery process is going out and doing the thing that's causing you to fear a wave or fear anxiety, in the case of sort of organic anxiety. Because you have to push that and use your coping skills to bring the fear level and the intensity down. So that was one thing that I learned before I ever took these drugs, when I was navigating my own anxiety disorder journey. And I think the same thing applies here. So if you're someone who, like me, loved working out before you ever took the drugs and you want to get back into it, but every time you do it, it knocks you on your ass and you feel terrible, a lot of the times it's just because you did too much too soon. And so right away you kind of want to recoil and you want to be like, I triggered a wave. I hate this. I hate the way this feels. It scares the crap out of me. These symptoms are so intense. And so you just avoid it altogether. I did that for a long time. you'd think I would have correlated, okay, the anxiety journey with this journey, but I just did not understand this journey really at all. It took me a long time to figure it out. And so I would do that. I would be like, to hell with this. I miss exercising. I really want to do it. And then I would go back into a full workout and then I'd feel horrible afterwards. And then I'd be like, well, I guess I can never work out again, rather than kind of starting slowly. And even when I did sort of learn that and start slowly, I would do too many days in a row and then it would kind of be a cumulative effect. So I have a very hard time just in my life in general going slow and pacing. I tend to be black and white. I tend to push hard, and it's this whole journey has really taught me how to go forward and then take a break and go forward, because I tend to just push and I until I've completely collapsed myself. That's how I was even before this happened to me. So this journey has taught me how to take my time with things. And I think that is the best approach to this, because again, you don't want to avoid it until you don't want to avoid everything until you feel better, because part of the process is that exposure. And even though it's not anxiety in the organic sense of the word, it is still a nervous system gone rogue and chaotic, and it has to be taught that not everything is dangerous, because it's perceiving everything as dangerous, and it's reacting, overreacting to things that it shouldn't be reacting to. And that absolutely is from the drug, like I fully acknowledge that. But part of the recovery process is starting to go push yourself and then pull back a little and push yourself and pull back a little. I think it's Coach Powers that says, what does he say, lulling and pushing, and or something like that. And I totally agree with that. And I think that is the most successful approach to whether it's exercising again or just doing things that you've been afraid to do. And that can be a whole wide range of things for people, depending on what their experience has been. And I remember when I was in the midst, actually the early stages of my journey, and people who were further ahead of me but not healed, and they would say to me, well, you shouldn't do XYZ because it's too stimulating. And I remember being so scared, and so I would just be like, like everything scared me. And then I got to a point where I was like, this, what I'm wanting to do, I know is not actually dangerous for me. I'm not talking about alcohol, drugs, like crazy things. It was just things that a healthy person would do as part of a healthy life, but I was afraid of that because of it stimulating my nervous system. And so I got to a point where I was like, this is crazy. I have to have some quality of life, and so I'm going to do this. And you either do it in a pacing way, which is best. Plus, I think another good thing is I have some coping skills, or even an expectation like this might spike me a little bit, but it's part of the recovery process. I'm not talking about pushing too hard and then fully crashing, but just starting to do some of those exposures and being like, if the symptoms come up or they flare a little bit, I'll, if it's really severe, obviously I'll really reevaluate. Maybe I did too much. But if I know it's something that's healthy for me, like exercising, and I know I just did a little bit, if the symptoms spike a little bit, I'm just going to kind of roll with that and use my coping skills, maybe take a little bit of a break, but then not avoid it forever. Because I think when you just pull back and avoid it indefinitely, you're sending a message to your subconscious and to your nervous system that that activity is not safe, therefore it needs to be avoided. And I think getting out of that mentality of this is good and this is bad can really be detrimental. And again, I'm not talking about known toxins and known things that can be damaging to health, but this can go down to foods as well. Whereas if you had a wave and you searched and you're like, oh, I ate ice cream, so it must be the ice cream causing the wave. Starting to avoid and avoid and avoid, it shrinks your world, it lowers your quality of life, and it sends signals that this is dangerous. And I think this is the best way around that, in my opinion, is that pacing and having that expectation of I might feel a little bit crappy afterwards, but I know this is good for me, or I know this is not harmful, outright harmful to me, and I'm just going to use my coping skills and then just take a break, and then I'll revisit it again in a couple of days or a week or whatever it might be, but try not to fully avoid those things. That's the way that I talk to people about it, and the way that I've sort of figured this out along the way that tends to work for people, and what I wish I would have known earlier on. Um, there's another topic in this same email suggestion that says, um, a video on how people who are still tapering know if their symptoms are the result of withdrawal and reducing dosage, or if they are experiencing symptoms from the remaining dosage they are still taking. As we know, the body is sensitive to many different medications when in withdrawal. Isn't it possible that the existing medication, if not fully tapered off, causes symptoms just like any other medication? That's a great question, and I don't fully know the answer, but I always try, if you've been watching this channel for a while, I try to boil it down to like simple. I try to make it as simple as possible in an extremely complex situation. The way that I see it is that if you're having, so obviously we know that these drugs are toxic to a degree, because otherwise they wouldn't be causing all of these issues. They are toxic, and a lot of people will ask this question: how do I know that my symptoms when they're still on the drug are from withdrawal and the dosage cut, or if they're from the drug itself? And I would, in the case of a paradoxical reaction, the way that I say it is, how do you feel right after you take the dose? Like, are you having consistently, day in and day out, increased symptoms, the opposite of what the drug should do? In the most cases, the drug should be calming to you. It should kind of flatten you, or reduce your anxiety or whatever, in the case of benzos. And if it's doing the direct opposite of that right after you take a dose or within the first couple of hours, that is more likely to be a result of the drug than of like a dose reduction. But I know that these drugs have cumulative effects, and I know that there's like the hormetic effect when it's dosage dependent, and there's all those technicalities I could get into. But on a basic level, that's the way that I navigate it, and the way that because I was directly paradoxical to benzos, and my personal experience was, sorry for the squeaky chair, when I would take a dose, within an hour I would have direct opposite effects of what a benzo should do. A benzo is supposed to be a CNS depressant, and I would get full on tremors, vibrations, like my whole, like just tremoring, fully tremoring and jerking, and just this activating effect. And that was recognized by the hospital. I don't think they called it a paradoxical effect, but a side effect or an adverse effect. And so I was taken off that benzo faster than would normally be recommended. But it is a complicated situation. And so I think, too, this is where the tracking can be helpful, because if you're like, okay, every time I do a dose cut, 3 days later I feel terrible. If it's consistent, you always want to look for patterns. If it's consistent, you can be pretty sure that it's from a dose reduction, and you're trying to control all the other, like, extenuating or external variables. So the less variables you have, the better. So say you were someone who was, I don't know, drinking during your taper, which obviously not recommended, nor am I ever saying that you should do that. But if someone has chosen to do that and they're also tapering, it's really hard to tell, okay, what is from the taper or the cut and what is direct effect from alcohol. And that can be a little bit complicated too. Obviously, usually from alcohol, it would be that the same day or the next day. And the drug can be that as well, but it can also have a delayed effect, and you're just kind of compounding the variables. And maybe that's a bad example, but you know what I'm saying. Anything that can be kind of confounding and layering those variables, you want to try to lower that or mitigate those variables as much as possible, so you can watch for those patterns of when you do a dose cut and how you're feeling. But it can be complicated, again, because of the dosages and the receptor occupancy. I get that. And there is no perfect way of telling, okay, this is from this and this is from this. But again, if you can like lower your life stress and lower those external variables and extraneous variables, and watch for patterns, if you're doing, say, a 4 to 6 week taper, like just watch for general patterns, it would give you a better idea of sort of what's causing what. But sometimes there is no rhyme or reason to when you get symptoms and what triggers a wave. And you don't want to get too caught up in, I'm going to look for, even though your brain will, it's natural for your brain to search, well, what caused this and what caused this, but you don't want to go down that, fall into that trap of always your brain latching on to whatever you were doing right before a wave was triggered and then become afraid of that thing. So you're wanting to look for consistency and consistent patterns, but a direct paradoxical effect in my observations and experience is after you take a dose consistently, every day you're taking that dose at the same time and you feel absolutely horrible within the first 1 to 4 hours or whatever, you're having an opposite effect to what the drug is supposed to do. That's just the way that I sort of generalize it, and it tends to be consistent with people's experiences, so that's why I break it down that way. But again, it is a complicated thing, and just like diabetes, I relate everything back to it. People think that, oh, you just don't eat sugar and then your blood sugar is fine, but with type 1 there's so many variables. I mean, how hot you are, your hormones, your stress levels, how much sleep you're getting, your, like, how many carbs you've eaten, how much you've exercised, all of these things. And you can't live robotically and be like, I'm going to do the exact same thing in the exact same order. You can try that, and sometimes people do that. And then they're like, I still got an erroneous blood sugar reading. What the heck? Like, why is this happening? I did the exact same thing today as I did yesterday. And people in the online community talk about this all the time. And the response will be, that's the, diabetes has a mind of its own, and this can be the same. So you're trying to eliminate variables, but you also have to live your life, and you're looking for consistencies, because these one-off things can happen. And yeah, that's I guess, hopefully that answers your question. Again, it's not simple, but I try to make it as simple as possible. So hopefully that's helpful. And yeah, if you guys have any other video topic requests, every once in a while I'll put just a post on YouTube asking, and I always appreciate your feedback because it's helpful for me to know what you guys are searching for. And again, I don't have all of the answers, but I feel like I've seen pretty much every situation now over the course of the past 7 years, and I try my best to again, look for patterns and see what consistently happens with people with certain types of drugs and timelines, and that's where I sort of draw my responses so let me know how you guys are doing, and if you have any other topic requests and or any feedback about the topic of this video. And I'll see you next time. Bye.